Sales conversations where both buyers and sellers win are rare and plagued by the cringe. We've all felt it. It's that sinking feeling that both buyer and seller get when the conversation is going off the rails. My name is Adam Clay. I'm the CEO of Rainmakers. I've spent 25 years building and leading global sales organizations and thinking about the sales conversation. At The Cringe, we put the sales conversation under the microscope and explore pathways to ensuring sales reps, leaders, and managers conduct great sales conversations. Today, my guest is Jason Aurora, Senior Director of Learning and Development at Hilti North America. Jason, welcome to The Cringe.
Hi, Adam. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to have you here. Hey, tell us a little bit, for starters, about Hilti and about your role at the organization.
Hilti is an organization that is based out of Schön, Liechtenstein, a tiny little country in Central Europe. Most people don't know where it is. Hilti is a very strong brand within the construction industry, in particular in Europe. But here in North America, we are obviously building a lot of propensity and a lot of interest, especially in the fact that we are really trying to change the construction industry for better. In fact, our tagline is making construction better. A little bit about me to answer your second question. So I have the privilege of leading the learning function here at Hilti North America. I tell everybody I have the best job at Hilti because I think about their development 24/7. So I know we'll talk a little bit more about that, but it's been an absolute pleasure to be in this role. And I'm really excited to talk to you about some of the things that we're doing and then also the industry. I'm excited to talk about construction.
Yeah, so am I. And so, Jason, one thing you didn't mention, which I think would be important for people listening to understand, is this fact. Hilti is a big company. So you have a global presence, a lot of employees, a lot of salespeople. Can you talk a little bit about the scale for those that aren't familiar with the company?
Yeah, I would be happy to. So we are approximately 35,000 people globally. We operate in over 120 countries. We have been around for over 8 decades. Family-run, privately held business, which is very rare when you think about the size and the scope of our business. What's really fascinating about who we are and what we do is that about 50% of that 35,000 are actually team members that are in the field, and they work autonomously in their vehicles, working off of job sites, meeting with executives of construction companies on a regular basis. So when you think of the complexity of the fact that we are a direct sales model, which when you think of the world digitizing at the propensity that it has over the last decade, let's say especially, the fact that Hilti continues to stand firm on the fact that we want to be there for our customers at a human-to-human level is something that we will never move away from. We're very proud of the fact that we can be one of the few organizations in this industry that can actually have that face-to-face human connection with our customers. And the direct sales model is something that works for us. Of the 35,000 globally, about 15,000 of those individuals are direct sales, or in some form or fashion in the field, supporting our customers every day. In North America, we're about 4,300 people total. And of that number, about 2,000 of those team members are in the field every day. And that's in every state, in every province in Canada.
All right. So, Jason, of the guests that we've had so far on The Cringe, you are unique because you're working in an organization with significant scale. And I want to get down to some of the hallmark questions of the show here in a moment. But again, just for context, tell us a little bit about what the day-to-day is like for one of your salespeople in the field.
So I would say, of course, this is dependent on a couple of factors. The size of are you working in a large urban center? Are you working in a rural, part of the United States or Canada? But having said all that, I would say the typical account manager, what we call our sales reps or account managers, a typical account manager will wake up really early in the morning, most likely have a cup of coffee or two, get in their Hilti truck, their red Hilti truck, which many of your listeners probably have seen them driving along the road somewhere where they live.
I have.
And those account managers, they do an incredible job of really trying to cover as much ground as they can, connecting with key customers within their territory. When they're sitting with either executives of these construction organizations or at the job site doing demonstrations of some of the innovative tools that we sell, one thing that account managers are doing when they're in the field is flexing between demonstrating the latest innovative product that Hilti has to offer to support their productivity gains on a job site, but also flexing to having conversations with executives at construction companies and talking about how to help you make your organization more productive, more safe, more sustainable. And these are conversations that in our industry, they have been happening for several years, but I would say with much larger construction organizations, multi-billion-dollar organizations that are building some of the world's largest infrastructure that we all enjoy. But we also support, what we would call our B, C, and D level customers, smaller customers, general contractors that are running, medium to smaller size projects. And those topics may not be top of mind for those individuals for various reasons. And what we do see is a significant shift in the industry, whether it be how our general contractors, communicate with various project managers or field engineers or architects on projects, going from, crazy amounts of paper and pen to using systems and tools that will allow them to be much more productive. So these are the typical conversations that an account manager will have. We are not a tool company. We're a productivity partner for our customers. So when we have that conversation, our account managers have to really be able to successfully have that conversation from the job site, which we call concrete, to the office, which we call carpet. So having a conversation from carpet to concrete can be very challenging, and we're going through that shift as we speak.
Well, that was one of the reasons I was so thrilled to be able to talk to you here on the Cringe, was because as different as your industry might be to some, the transitions that you're making in the sales conversation are identical to what we hear from almost every other industry. And let me just play it back to you, and you can tell me if I understood what you've said correctly. So your account managers, your salespeople do what those in other industries do. They talk about the product, they demo products, they try to get to meetings with executives to talk about solutions and have a more consultative dialogue. I guess the fundamental difference is that the setting for your salespeople is largely out in the field, and it can be on concrete, as you described, or a carpet. And so what anybody who's listened to the Cringe hears is that most organizations are trying to transition from a product centric conversation to a solution centric conversation. So shifting from where I talk about features and benefits to where I talk about what's on the customer's mind, with the aim of understanding how I might be able to help them. Have I understood what you've said correctly, or did I get that wrong?
No, you got it 100% accurate. We are
all right.
We are no different in this industry than any of the others that you've mentioned, and that's what's really exciting, because construction is definitely here to play and to also compete in the exact same way.
Yeah, that's right. And in most ways, anybody who's listening relies more on your industry than most. We just might not think about it from one day to the next. So wonderful. Let me ask you a question. So you've been around the sales conversation in your role and others your entire career. In a sales conversation, what makes you cringe?
Yeah, I've been waiting for you to ask me that question, because I have listened to this podcast, and I'm happy to talk about this. I think I know the thing that makes me cringe in a sales conversation is when a salesperson talks more than they listen, and in many ways makes assumptions on what I may want as a consumer or as a customer or as a buyer, versus really digging deep and listening to the overall business of what's actually happening from end to end. It's frustrating for me in the role that I'm in, but I think anyone that hears this podcast and listens to what I'm saying will also either has experienced or will experience purchasing or being involved in any sort of sales interaction or transaction, I should say, and feel like they're not truly being heard. And effective listening and active listening for me are really important in general. So that makes me cringe.
All right. Well, I can certainly recognize it. I have to ask you a follow-up question. So, if in a sales conversation, sellers talking too much, making assumptions about what the buyer might actually need makes you cringe, why? Why is that?
I think fundamentally, whether it's a sales transaction or it's just human connection in just general terms, I think there's a couple of things that human beings want, whether it's in a formal communication or an informal communication between two or three people, or it's an actual sales transaction. And those things are, I want to feel like I matter. I want to feel like I belong here somewhere. I don't want to feel inferior. And I want to feel safe. I want to feel like I can trust that you have my best interests. So when you haven't actively listened to what I truly need, that will immediately put somebody on the defense. I mean, it's human nature. I know that's how I feel. I know many, many people that I've spoken to about this feel the same way. So how do you, as a salesperson, make me feel heard, seen, that I matter, that my needs, and this is the key. Many times in a sales transaction, I may not actually know what I need, but through open questioning and dialogue and conversation and building trust, we will eventually get to a place where the sales rep and the individual come to a place of agreement and full understanding. And that, in my opinion, comes from open questions and dialogue and sometimes multiple conversations, not the first conversation.
Well, it's so interesting to hear, and I want to ask about the role that you think experience plays in having a conversation. Because one thing that we've heard from other guests on the show is that experience can be antithetical to doing the types of things that you've just mentioned, Jason. Having a conversation that sets buyers at ease, that gets them comfortable, opening up about their critical business issues. I don't know for sure, but I would think that in the construction industry in particular, there are a lot of salespeople that have been doing it for a very long time, that have probably seen every variation on the customer problem that they can address under the sun, and would readily, if given the opportunity, tell that to a buyer. So how on earth, with all of that experience, uh, do you begin to change the type of conversation that a seller used to have, and by virtue of their experience might have, to the one that the one that is best for a buyer?
So I think, like most things in life, there's pros and cons, right? It's a simple question, but a difficult answer. So let me try to unpack this. What we've realized at Hilti, and just my experience in 15 years working with people in HR functions in various industries, always supporting sales, what I can say is experience or inexperience can both bring positive and sometimes challenging situations to the forefront. So if we talk about an experienced individual who, let's say, a profile is 10 to 15 years in direct sales, understands the industry, can walk onto a job site or walk into an owner office and have a very, very comfortable conversation about anything related to a job site construction management project. At the same time, that's a positive. At the same time, what happens many times, because we're humans, is that we're littered with bias. And what happens with that is that what has worked for me in the past will have to work for me in the future. And so that reptilian brain, that part of your brain that is just so eager to keep you safe and keep you moving in the same direction, because we're also very habitual creatures, we have a harder time with change, and we have a harder time with our change receptors to actually see what is happening around me that could potentially be different because of that bias. So the challenge with someone who's very experienced, and I want to be clear, this is not everyone who's experienced. But what happens sometimes with people who are more experienced is that part of them that is very skillful and very aware of the tactical and technical parts of the role sometimes won't necessarily be open to the other things that are happening around them, whether it's the industry shifts or asking open or bigger topic questions to really get deeper to the overall topic at bay with a customer. When you're talking to someone who's less experienced, it's kind of like, and I mean this in the most respectful way, but anyone that's listening that has children, I mean, children are fascinating because they're not afraid of failing. You can ask them anything, you can do anything, and half the time children are the first in line to put up their hand and say, yes, 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 I want to show you, I want to do it. We see the same behaviors with brand new team members at Hilti and in other organizations that have never really done it before. They're still innately biased because they're human, but what they haven't necessarily encountered is the failure within the industry and what hasn't worked. So the entrepreneurialism and the ability to kind of ask questions, you know, the saying, ignorance is bliss. Truly, it can be bliss if you leverage and you lean into it. But at the same time, the drawback is they're not as able to have those deeper conversations, especially with someone who's a very deep functional expert. So there's going to be trade-offs regardless of what you do.
I love the way that you just walked us through your thought on the matter. In the history of the cringe, that is an insight that we have not heard before. I thought that was very well put. I want to build on that a little bit. So in your role in a large organization, you're doing your part to keep the organization ahead of where the sales conversation needs to be in a way that recognizes some of the big shifts in your industry that you mentioned. What are some of the cringe moments that happen in the transitions like you're a part of today?
Here's how I would answer that question. I think the best way to describe the cringe is if we look at it from a hierarchy perspective. So at the top of this pyramid, let's say, you have the organization at large. So from my vantage point, or from the vantage point of an executive, what would make them cringe is the fear of the unknown and the courage that it takes to have to move into a direction that hasn't been proven. But we all believe as an organization, and many of your organizations as well, we know that the external world is shifting. We know that digitization is real. We know that customer mandates are changing. We know that consumers on the end that are purchasing products, services, software, whatever it may be, also have very different expectations. So as an executive, the cringe is, wow, I mean, how do I tackle all these topics? And the most important thing for an executive today that has salespeople working within their organization is, how do I shift the mindset of thousands of people to shift and pivot direction when I've been fairly successful for the last several decades? So to make that shift, that takes considerable courage, and it takes a lot of strategic resilience to be able to push through, because very much like any other strategic shift, you will have peaks and valleys, and you've got to work through the long game. The customer-centric approach is not a short-term approach. It's a long-term approach.
That's right.
If we take a step down and you look at a team leader, let's assume someone who leads a team of sales reps. This individual is sandwiched in between all of those expectations that I talked about earlier, the pressure, the challenge, the push down of all those things that have to shift. Guess who is actually pushing and making those initiatives happen? It's the sales leaders in all these organizations that are having the courageous conversations, sometimes the difficult conversations of having to talk to a sales rep about, hey, you're doing incredible work. However, I also need you to shift because we're shifting. And so that is something that cringes. I think if I talk to sales leaders, that is a tough spot to be in, especially in a moment of success. Because let's face it, when you're in a tough spot, when the organization isn't doing well, or when the economy starts to sink a little bit, those conversations can be a little bit easier in tough times because you have the propensity of negativity that's there to support you.
Right. You have a mandate.
But when things are great, it can be a little bit more challenging for a sales leader to convince and otherwise sometimes negotiate with a sales rep. Let's face it, these are salespeople. They're good at negotiating. They're great at having conversations. So being honest and transparent as a sales leader is critical. And when you don't do that, it can be very cringeworthy. At the individual level as a sales rep, and let me just say, I can speak on behalf of Hilti when I say that our sales account managers are the true heroes. These are the people that are out there day in, day out, having really, really impactful conversations with our customers. And they're doing incredible work to shift the industry and to improve the perception. So, what sometimes can be cringeworthy is when a learning and development function like the one that I have the privilege of running comes in and says, hey, you need to learn some new things. And here's
Yeah.
why. Well, what do you mean? Does that mean that I haven't been good at what I do? Of course not. You've been great at what you do. But we want to pre-skill you before, I would say, the hurricane comes, not to be over dramatic. But we see the storm heading. We see digitization, and we want our account managers on the ground. We want them to be confident and competent in the space of having that conversation between carpet and concrete. And so the way that we do that is a couple of ways. One, we want to make sure that we leverage the strength that the ones that are doing it really, really great, we want to leverage them and do teach backs and make sure that those account managers or sales reps that are still learning in that process are learning from the experts, the ones that are doing it really well. We also want to understand that people have different learning styles. Adam, where you may be more auditory and visual, I may be more kinesthetic, meaning I need to roll up my sleeves and feel, and do, and walk into a customer conversation and fail forward, as we say at Hilti, and come back and talk and socialize about that failure with my sales reps so that they don't make the same mistake I did. So these are just some examples that the learning team is really leaning into to, again, make sure that this propensity of learning is building confidence and competence in the sales force because we see the shift coming.
It's so interesting how pervasive, Jason, the need to shift the sales conversation is. And it occurs to me that no salespeople are immune from the shift that needs to happen in order to keep themselves, their companies, the customers that they're helping competitive. My sense is that it's a challenging and slow process because you have to unwind some of the belief system that potentially very successful sellers have built a career upon. So, can you talk a little bit about the underlying belief system that might have to change in order to help get an individual salesperson or a sales manager or an executive, because you've spoken about 3 tiers here, from one point to the next? Because I think that's where the hard work, particularly as an L&D leader, can often be.
It's definitely challenging. If we take a step back, Adam, from the question, I need to provide a little bit of context before getting into that. But in order for a sales rep to truly be successful, in my personal opinion, when we think about where the world is going and evolving and how consumers or customers, whatever you want to call them, however you want that conversation to be as effective as possible. At the end of the day, we're driving sales because we're for profit and we're all here to make money and make a living. The beautiful thing about Hilti is that, yes, we understand that at the core. But before we ever get to any of that, what we understand as an organization is that our culture as an organization is focused on people first and outperformance second. But when someone comes into an organization where at the forefront, there's a significant focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're attracting people into our organization that have no experience in construction, but they've had experience with sales. So the first thing I would say is sales is such an amazing career opportunity for anyone because it's this one place where you can actually have a number of transferable skills that can be used in a variety of different organizations. So you're not a one-trick pony when you're a salesperson. In fact, you have incredible skill sets that can be leveraged in various industries, in various conversations. And the reason why I talk about our culture is that when I talked about those cringy moments from the executive all the way down to our account managers, it makes it a lot easier when you're working for an organization that has a very strong people culture. The reason why I share that is when we talk to our sales reps or our account managers about how to carry this conversation that we're talking about, it doesn't start with anything related with sales. In fact, we try to sell nothing in those first conversations. What we're really, really trying to do is build a partnership and a relationship with our customers. Because from the moment we have that first interaction, we want to be everything to those customers. We want to be embedded in their processes from beginning to end. As I said earlier, we're not just a tool company. Yes, we sell tools, of course, it's part of our portfolio, but we also sell software, we sell ideas, we consult. We are there from beginning to end. And I think when a sales rep knows that that's what they're walking into, of course, there's still sales components of the role, and it's still an important part of a salesperson's overall job description. But beyond that, at the highest level, we talk about building really strong, long-lasting relationships, because in order to get sales, in order to build trust with your customer, we believe that the human-to-human interaction is so vital. And again, it goes back to why we're a direct sales organization. We will never move away from that concept because we believe wholeheartedly that we're a people company first. And to be a people company, in our opinion, we need to be in front of our people, both internally and with our customers.
That's so interesting, and I want to double click on that because I don't know that every sales organization thinks that way, right? There's a very strong temptation to approach buyer-seller conversations as more transactional than what you've described. And so here's my question. How do you teach that skill to people? How do you teach the skill associated with building a relationship, building rapport, and building trust that's going to underpin the type of long-term relationships that a company like yours, which has been around for a really long time, clearly has built and needs to build in order to grow? How do you teach that?
Yeah, it's interesting. So it's not overnight. It's something that has to be built and ingrained in overall integration processes when people either join the organization or they're long-standing, long-tenured with an organization. Those opportunities to continue to upskill and future skill have to be there, not just for sales people, but anyone in an organization. All of us as employees of organizations are challenged to continue to develop ourselves. But in the context of a salesperson, what I can say is that at Hilti, learning and development is at the cornerstone of our people strategy. So what I mean by that is from the moment you step into the organization, you are introduced into this very strong propensity of learning. So what do I mean by that? To give you an example of the journey of what a salesperson would go through when they join the organization, we are mixed with asynchronous and synchronous learning opportunities where people come together. Our operations center in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is where I'm speaking to you from today, we have a 30,000 plus square foot facility where we train our new team members when they come into the organization. And some of the skills that I've been talking about with you during the podcast are things that we do with these account managers when they join. They're also learning key applications within the industry. So we have trade-specific segmented salespeople that will come in. And so we want them to build the confidence and the competence on the functional side so they can have educated conversations with a customer in a particular trade area. But at the same time, we holistically look at the salesperson, and we also do things like role plays. We talk about the different personas that a customer may come across. We will never cover every scenario for a salesperson, but what we're trying to do in that first 8 to 12 months of a salesperson joining Hilti is giving them as much exposure as possible to a couple of things. One is access to our executives so that they can hear firsthand what the strategy of the organization is. Access to the learning team who are experts in this space and can provide coaching and guidance. Access to their sales leader. And keeping in mind, as I mentioned earlier, our people are autonomous. They're working all over the country and all over North America. And sometimes your leader is in a different state or in a different province. So making sure that there are regular connections between leaders and their team members to continue to practice and provide input and talk about failures, and maybe even be coached by another sales rep who has shown tremendous growth in this space, and going to sales calls together so that you can watch and then practice and do it in front of that person in a multitude of ways in your own style. We also believe in paint by numbers, right? So when you join the organization, sometimes, we have a recipe that we believe is very successful. And so we ask that you paint numbers, meaning We want you to follow our process. We want you to go down the path of how we do things. And then once you get to the point where you're a little bit more confident and a little bit more artistic, so to speak, then you don't have to paint by numbers, and we can, allow you to just be your true full self on the sales call and have those conversations in a way that make you feel good. It's a long answer, Adam, but I would say there isn't a specific tactic that we would take on this topic. I really think it requires us to listen to what the team member needs, while at the same time balancing that with our strategy, our way of working, and how we believe relationships need to be built in this industry to help us be here for the long term.
All right. Jason, thank you. Thank you for that. Where in your experience do you encounter the stiffest resistance when you're part of a team that's trying to help salespeople move from one conversation to another for the betterment of everybody? Salespeople, customers, shareholders. Where do you get the resistance and how do you overcome it?
Yeah, it's something that we think about quite often. In a learning function, of course, it's managing through the resistance. So what does that look like in the context of an organization? So what I would say is a couple of things. One, when someone is very successful and they're making plan, they're having great conversations and successful transformations with their customers, they're building relationships like never before. There's a lot of incentive to continue what you're doing because clearly it's been quite good. And that makes perfect logical sense. The resistance comes when an organization will then say to this individual, you need to shift. And not just you need to shift, we need to shift as an organization. That's a very difficult, very cringy conversation to have. I think I talked about this a little bit earlier. How does that sales leader do that? So when we think about the mindset that this team member is in, this sales rep is in, I think you need to really get back to the fundamental belief system of how this person is motivated and how how does that align to an organization's needs? We talk about the sales conversation. Let's talk about the conversation between an organization and a salesperson. In this case, I would say acknowledging that there's been incredible work and acknowledging that this person is definitely demonstrating really successful tactics and opportunities to continue to build a relationship with a customer. As an organization, the organizational belief system is shifting to be more customer-centric, let's say, or to focus less on product and to focus more on solutions overall. If that shift is happening in a belief system, translating that to a specific account manager when you have thousands of account managers can be tricky. And so there's multiple things that have to happen to fight this resistance that may come. Because the resistance, in my humble opinion, is very rarely a negative resistance of, I will not. It's never that. It's more so how can you tell me to change when I've been so successful for the last X period of time? So really communicating that belief system at the organizational level. So in our case at Hilti, when we talk about making construction better, we believe it. And we also believe that the people working in this industry are heroes. And if there was any moment in history to think about that, it was COVID. Frontline workers who continue to show up to work every single day with their masks on to get the work done that we needed. And so I think in many ways, we identified many people in this industry as true heroes that showed up every day. So using and leveraging that context and making sure that our team members, our account managers, our salespeople also truly understand that from a fundamental belief system, we want to be there for our customers in every way, shape, or form to help on the topics of productivity, sustainability, and health and safety, right? And if we can go in and really help our account managers understand that belief system and link it to their personal belief system, that's where you can definitely pass through resistance. That takes time. That takes incredible filtration, meaning from an executive team down to a director team, down to a leader, down to an account manager. But I would say that's one way to help account managers or sales reps through the resistance. Because once they firmly believe that this is in fact not only the best thing for the organization to move forward, more importantly than the organization, it's helping them believe that their customers need it desperately. And what we truly believe is that we're not making up what customers need. We have listened to our customers. Because of this direct sales model that we have such a privilege of knowing firsthand what our customers across the world, in particular North America, are in desperate need of support in. And we believe we can be the best partner. And if we can demonstrate that to our sales account managers, they will individually be very successful. And then, of course, the organization will be successful as well. So that's one. And then the other thing that I would say to continue to fight this resistance that may come is, I believe my team and I are at the forefront of this, which is creating learning opportunities to also build confidence and competence. And I've said this before, but one of the biggest resistors that anybody has, but in particular salespeople, is I don't want to do that. That's uncomfortable. It makes me feel icky. I don't feel as smooth in this new process. And what we know is that by practicing and by getting uncomfortable and rolling up your sleeves and failing and falling and getting back up and failing and falling back up, we will eventually, through that change process, help build the confidence that our sales reps want and need and desire to be successful. So those are just some examples of what I would do. In summary, it's really communicating effectively and helping our sales reps understand the belief system that exists at the organizational level, and that in most cases, it actually does align with their own personal belief system. And then it's also scaffolding that with great learning experiences that build the confidence that they need to get out there and do it.
So Jason, you mentioned there the role that practice plays in helping move somebody from one point to another as it pertains in the conversation. And I know that you more than most have put a lot of thought into creating opportunities for practice for salespeople at Hilti. Could you talk a little bit more? Because I think people listening would be interested to hear from you how you think about the role that practice plays in building up confidence and proficiency. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but maybe even new habits.
What I would share is there's a couple of things. One is what's fascinating about the work that my team and I do is that we realize that the more effective learning strategies that we have are the ones that are customized to individual needs. Just to give you a high level perspective, we have different languages, we have different generations, we have different experiences. We have individuals who come at the same problem with very different solutions and very different approaches, but end up in some way, shape, or form getting to what we need to get to. What I would say there is, I think there's a lot of different levers that we can pull as an organization, and then I would talk a little bit about what an individual can do. So at the organizational level, whether it's leveraging technology, we hear a lot about artificial intelligence in the media and just in general. And, there is a lot of truth to leveraging technology to scale up learning at higher volumes. So when you work at an organization like ours, where you have thousands of people, the traditional ways of doing a one-on-one role play are not always going to be effective. So how do you leverage technology to better suit your needs? The other beauty with technology is it also offers psychological safety, so that if an individual, again, remember that belief system I talked about. So if you do believe, let's say I get to the place where I believe that my impact is going to be beneficial and that I can change, but now I need to practice. And now I actually need to work on my craft. That's the next step that an individual has to take to really consider, what is it that I individually need to do to better myself, to then get out there and do what I need to do. So again, leveraging technology to help in that space. When we talk about repetitiveness and building habits, I think it's also important to role play this behavior. And I don't mean traditional role plays. I mean role play from the executive down. I think having true role models in the organization that can role play this behavior, and I can demonstrate this behavior. I talk the talk and I walk the walk, and you see me behaving in the way that I expect you to behave, is a very important and fundamental part of pushing through the resistance that may exist. And also, if I can see my leader do it, and if I can see my colleagues do it, and if the head of the organization does it, and if the learning function's doing it, then at that point, that's the beauty of sometimes having some peer pressure where other people around me have shown me success and are demonstrating engagement in this topic. I then can do it as well. And of course, that takes time. But I would say those are some of the underlying tactics that have been successful for us. It's leveraging technology where it works, but also leveraging individuals who are very good in this space and bringing them up on some sort of a platform where they can demonstrate their skill sets and what's made them successful in the sales conversation and building relationships with our customers. And I know that those are not new. For many of your listeners, they too are probably using the same tactics in their own organizations.
Yeah, and so just to add to your recap of what you said, you mentioned something that we don't hear often enough about, and that is, as it pertains to practice, the role that psychological safety plays. Like, people want to be able to develop new skill, say conversational skill, like we're talking about today, in private, where they can make mistakes, where they can learn through trial and error. They don't want to perfect their foul shot, in front of a crowded stadium. They want to go to the park at night and shoot and work on their form when nobody else is looking. I don't think it's any different when it comes to practicing a sales conversation. I think that's what you meant by creating opportunities for people to do that within psychological safety. Is that right?
Yeah. So thank you. And I appreciate you bringing that up. It's a very, very important topic to Hilti, not just the topic of psychological safety, but I'm very proud of the foundation that we have in the organization from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective. And where it ties into this discussion is that the more diversity of thought, the better the outcome, in my opinion, generally what we see from a sales perspective in a sales conversation. And then the psychological safety piece is so critical for us in learning, because to your point, Adam, well said, people do learn differently. People absorb information differently, and people are terrified of failure. So if you're terrified of failure, you're not going to be very comfortable building these habits in front of others, doing a sales role play with your boss, or doing with your executive in the organization. I can't think of anything cringier than that, right? So being able to build safety in there would be really, really great. And it all ties into at least our diversity strategy. And I'm sure many listeners are also thinking the same.
All right. We are almost out of time here, but I want to give you an opportunity to share anything that might be on your mind in the form of a quick hot take for those that are listening. Go ahead.
Thank you. So if you're a salesperson listening to this right now, my humble advice for you would be this: be open to the prospects of where the world is shifting and evolving. As much as we prepare and we think we sometimes have a crystal ball, we don't. And the reality is, the biggest advice that I can give from a learning perspective is pre-skill yourself. What I mean by that is, develop skills today that you don't necessarily need tomorrow, but you may need a year from now. So skills that, again, from a head of learning perspective, what I can share with you are important, critical skills that I think anyone needs into the future, but in particular salespeople, are active listening skills, really leaning in by listening more and talking less, and demonstrating active listening to your customer or to whoever it is that you're speaking with. Analytical skills and financial skills, being able to read a balance sheet and understand the financials of your customer when you are speaking with them, if they do disclose certain pieces of information, because the more educated and the more comfortable you are in that space, the more highly regarded I believe you will be. And last but not least, don't forget the human side of the business. So building a relationship is much more important than getting that immediate sale. And I know that it's one of the cringiest things from a sales rep perspective to walk away from a deal. Can you believe that? But imagine for a moment you're building trust and you're building a relationship with a customer, and you actually do walk away from that really strong urge to sell this small X, to realize that a couple of months from now, by continuing to build this relationship, you could be embedded in your customer's business like never before. That's true sales, in my opinion. And that's where I think the world is shifting. We want to build relationships with people, not sales transactions. That would be my biggest piece of advice.
All right. Well, a perfect note on which to finish the episode. Very nicely said, Jason. All right. My guest today has been Jason Aurora, Senior Director of Learning and Development at Hilti North America. Jason, so thank you so much for joining us today on The Cringe.
Thank you, Adam. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
If you've enjoyed listening, follow me, Adam Clay, on LinkedIn. I'm regularly sharing cringe-killing thoughts around the sales conversation there. This podcast is produced and presented by Rainmakers, where we believe the sales conversation is everything. Check us out online at www.rnmkrs.com.